So when we talk about leadership, we're talking about influencing others, winning people to a new way of thinking, right? Now, a lot of this, as we talked about before, is emotional based, right? Typically speaking, we're going to buy from the person that we like more than from the person who necessarily has the best product or has the best deal. Because we think first in terms of emotions, we think first in terms of who we connect with, who we like best in all of this. Doesn't mean that leadership is all about a social, popularity contest type of thing, but it does mean that you have to invest a lot in your people, both in terms of their skills and in terms of relating to them and developing those emotional bridges. Leadership is goal-oriented. It's great. I remember once I was part of a weekend retreat for my school. This was when I lived back in Chicago. And we were in one of these suburban hotel-type facilities, not like a regular hotel like the one that I stayed in down the block over here. One building, everything is pretty clear where everything is. You have your elevators in the center, you go up, you go down, etc. This is one of those sprawling places where you got long corridors to this room, to this wing. Who knows where it is. You got to take a map everywhere you go. And so we had our meal, and we were heading to the final part of the evening program. And there are a bunch of gentlemen that I'm walking back with. We were going to go to a prayer service. And we start walking the wrong way with me at the head. Some guy turns to me and he says, "At least you weren't leading the Hebrews in the desert." So it's all great and good to be a leader, but you got to be goal-oriented, right? Your goals have to be quantifiable. They have to be measurable. SMART goals or something similar. You're familiar with that, I'm sure, in some way, right? Knowing what you're after, making sure that you can quantify it so that you know that you've gotten there. And then number 3, to maximize the efforts of others, as well as their skills. Identify what are people good at, what are people passionate about, trying to make the right fit wherever you can in order to advance your agenda, in order to advance your goals. Some other qualities, we talked before about being an active listener, right? Leaning forward in the chair, strong eye contact, putting your phone down, taking your phone off the hook. One gentleman, I remember telling me a story. He had been working with schools back in the 1940s and 50s, and these were from the independent school population. Many of them were really running on a shoestring budget. Principals were extremely, drawn out in many ways and had barely any time for anything. Goes into one school. Principal gives him all the time he wants to listen to his program and all of this. However, every 5 seconds he seems to be interrupted by something else. The secretary calls in, he takes the phone call, looks at this, looks at that, was sitting there for an hour. But at the most, he might have gotten 5 minutes of the guy's attention. Walked into another office, was told by the principal, "I could barely give you 5 minutes." But in those 5 minutes, he was all his. Eyes were focused, all the things were put aside. What do you need from me? Well, how can I help you? Whatever that was, and they finished. The guy said, "I got so much more out of that second conversation. I felt my time was valued. I felt that his eyes were on me, and I felt that there was something that I was really able to communicate, which I wasn't able to do in that first context." So I remember very vividly being accused at the beginning of my leadership journey of being too interested in my BlackBerry, which has now moved on to a different, device, let's call it. But I thought I was being responsive. I thought I was able to, as a result of having it available, respond to a text from a teacher here, from an email there, parent, etc. But I wasn't focused enough on the active listening. And it hurt me in terms of developing or not developing key relationships. So that's a very important piece. This I just happen to do alphabetically. It's not designed based on what I think is more important. Any order doesn't matter to me. Building from strength, right? Knowing your people, trying to use the talents that you already have in place, collaborating, that you bring ideas together from different sources we've discussed. This is an important piece. Risk is part of the game. I don't know if Churchill talked about it. One of the quotes that you had, I think, talked about the idea of leadership is not just a nice thing to have. With it comes responsibility. And risk is all about responsibility. Okay, effective communicator. There's so many different ways by which to communicate, but do not lose the human touch. That is a very important point. I have a post that's called "Don't let email become e-fail." And the idea is that we lose a lot. We don't realize this. We lose a lot through technological communication. We lose the affect. We lose the body language. We lose the tone and the tenor. So you could help a little bit with a smiley face or one of these kinds of things, but it never fully replaces that dimension. So I encourage you all, yes, of course you need electronic communication for information purposes, but please don't ever get embroiled in an issue with email or chat or any other type of thing. First of all, you can never get it back. It could go sideways in a second. But don't you feel, whoo, right? Look what I just got, whoo! And it goes hither and thither, as I think, I don't know, the Hat or one of these books talks, in that language, but you get the idea. But more importantly, a lot is lost in translation. And eventually you're going to have to clean up the mess anyway, so you may as well do it at the beginning and save yourself the agony. Okay? Credibility, we talked about this before. Right? A person who is credible is somebody people are going to want to respond to and listen to. Driven. Driven means that they have drive, that they are motivated. They come every day to work, not prepared to rest on their laurels, but really want to continue to advance the sake of the organization in a variety of ways. They're engaged in the process. Now, I think the last quote, was it the last one? Who was talking about, excuse me for a second, I apologize for reading over. Which is the one that referred to servant leadership? There's one about carrying the water? Well, thank you. Okay, so I think that speaks to this idea, right? That granted, of course, if you need somebody who's going to mop the floors, the leader's not necessarily supposed to do that. But the point is that you see yourself first and foremost as somebody who's facilitating other people's success. You're helping them achieve all of their goals, right? Now you still have to be contributing to it, but it's about service. It's about putting your people in front of you, creating that sense of humility and trust. And that's our last point as well. If I say I'm going to do something, I do it. If I say I'm going to meet with you, it goes on my calendar right away. Or I have somebody make sure that I don't forget about it. But if I'm going to deliver, I don't sort of flop around with it and then ultimately not able to provide. Because that is a very, very quick way to lose people if you don't follow through on your commitments. And you're somebody, it's not all about commitment, by the way. It's also about how you handle a conversation. If somebody talks to you, they share private, sensitive, vulnerable information. Do you keep that in confidence? Right? Do you hold on to it and use it the way that they want you to use it, with the respect that it deserves? Or do you somehow leak it out in some type of way that ultimately creates a lack of trust and a lack of, let's call it, commitment and connection? So all of these are valuable qualities, and I would encourage everybody to think about them in a variety of ways. I'm sure all of you are using them, but all of them can continue to contribute to your professional practice. Now I'm going to skip this question collectively because we're short on time, but you may want to think about which are the ones that are either most important to you in your practice, or perhaps which are the ones that you want to learn more about. Right? How can you find out more? The good news is there's so much out there on leadership today, both in printed form, in video form, all sorts of different ways that you can access more about leadership. So I would encourage you to be a lifelong learner in this area. Right? Leadership is a constantly evolving field. That's why there's so many books that keep coming out. Right? We can't just rely upon the values of yesteryear. It doesn't mean that there aren't timeless values here. Right? I think that most of the quotes, if not all of them on the paper, some of them are from the 18th century, some of them are from before, some of them after, some of them are in fact timeless. But nonetheless, because organizations change in so many different ways, it's important for us to stay current with the latest ideas associated with leadership.